Now it's believed the fourth may have been headed for Camp David. We continue our coverage now with Eyewitness News at 4 o'clock.
Don't worry, don't worry.
And then we heard the crash. We ran to the window.
Building and went into the trade center.
Trade center. We saw that shrapnel fall, and we said, "Get out!" And then
The left side of the World Trade Center out on the second building. That's all we saw, and everybody just panicked and ran.
A day of terror rocks the United States to its core. 4 commercial airliners are hijacked. 3 of them are used on attacks on U.S. targets. The terrorist attacks collapse New York's famous World Trade Center towers. And part of the Pentagon, President Bush vows the perpetrators will be brought to justice.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
And what a day it's been. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gravir Dinsa.
I'm Gordon Peterson. This is an Eyewitness News special report on the terrorist attacks today on America. The scenes of terror that unfolded today looks like something out of a movie. First, a plane hijacked by terrorists flies into one of the World Trade Center towers. A few minutes later, while that structure smokes and burns, a second plane is caught on tape flying straight into the second tower, and the building erupts as the plane crashes into a huge fireball. The damage caused by the crash causes one of the massive towers, Tower 2, to collapse, and a short time later, Tower 1 tumbles in a huge cloud of dust. Both towers were 110 stories tall, and the impact of the planes reduced them to rubble.
And while many of us were watching what was going on in New York, this is what happened in Washington. A second wave of the attack. Another plane crashes near the Pentagon, sparking several explosions and a fire there. Part of the Pentagon collapses. Military officials say there are extensive casualties and an unknown number of deaths. And a fourth hijacked plane crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Virginia Representative Jim Moran said after a Marine Corps briefing today that plane was intended for Camp David, which of course is the presidential retreat in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland.
4 hijacked airliners, 3 direct hits. The death toll of the most brazen terrorist attack ever on U.S. soil is expected to be very, very high.
One of the direct hits was right here in the Washington area, as we just said, and it was at the Pentagon. Our Dave Statter is there for us. We have live team coverage of all of our day's events. Let's begin with Dave at the Pentagon. Dave?
Well, Gavir and Gordon, we had just heard the end of a briefing here by Tory Clark, spokesperson for the Pentagon, Chief John Jester, spokesperson or chief of the Defense Protective Service. And basically, they can't tell us how many people are dead here. They know they have casualties here. We'll look at the building where firefighting operations continue here many hours after this plane crashed into the Pentagon this morning. Let's go back to some videotape from earlier today when the fire first started and the plane crash occurred. This is what it looked like just minutes after the plane crash this morning. And rescue operations began. We saw a couple burned men pulled away, then medevaced. We heard from Tory Clark about an Army captain who jumped in to help out the injured people, pulling people away, those who were burned. He himself was burned, had his hands burned, was sent to the hospital, says he's back at the scene trying to help out. One of the heroes of today. A lot more, I'm sure, and a lot more people we don't know about who have lost their lives here, both on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon and in that building. We just don't have an accounting yet. They cannot provide it here. Let's go to the other tape that we have is of the collapse of the Pentagon. I believe we have that tape of when, during this firefighting operation, I'm guessing 45 minutes into it, suddenly the center area where the plane crash occurred and the most fire was, it collapsed. We don't know if anybody else was injured during that collapse, but this was much like a smaller version of what happened at the World Trade Center. The firefighting operation continues, and after that is over with, the urban search and rescue team from Fairfax County, we are told, will be able to go into the building and start searching for people. They're not very optimistic from the people I've talked to in the fire service because of the great amount of fire that anybody trapped will have had to deal with that heavy smoke. And if you remember, we've told you many times that smoke is what kills people in the fire, and there's a great deal of smoke here. Smoke often kills before the fire ever gets to you. The problem in this building is that it is It's an old building that has a lot of nooks and crannies. The fire gets trapped in it. There have been fires before in the Pentagon, and they've had to deal with the same situation, fire traveling from one end of the building to the other. That initial jet fuel burned off. The fire went into the bowels of the building and is now still being attacked by Arlington firefighters who have been assisted by firefighting agencies from all over the region as far away as Montgomery County and Loudoun County. Now, one thing we heard from the Pentagon spokesperson is they can't at the moment account for all the heads of the military. They are still trying to do that, and they can't account for all the military personnel who are in the Pentagon. They're still trying to figure out who is okay. They have asked that we put out this number. It's 877-663-6772. It's the muster line for Navy and Marine personnel who work at the Pentagon. If you work there and they have not accounted for you, please call in. Let them know you're okay. Let them know where you are. We are expecting further briefings through the day. I know everybody wants to know how many people died here. We just don't have an answer for you.
Rumsfeld was inside at the time of the impact. Is that right, Dave?
He was inside, heard the explosion, came outside to actually help, we are told, for 15 minutes. One of those who helped with the initial people who were injured.
And there's still strategic planning going on inside now.
Right. The National Military Command Center is in the Pentagon. It's smoky, they say in there, but that's where Secretary Rumsfeld has been since he went back inside the building and calling all the shots, helping to call all the shots for the military, as we've heard the activation of aircraft carriers and the like into seaports.
Dave Statter.
And the military's gone to Delta, which is the highest state of alert, I guess.
Yes, they said it's the highest threat alert they're at the moment, which of course we assumed, but the Pentagon did confirm that a few moments ago.
Dave, a quote off the Associated Press: "Any notion of America being invincible died."
Our whole life,
our lives have
all changed.
And Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska says, America is forever changed. America is in for a long fight.
Look what happened today, Dave. For the first time in history, as I understand it, the FAA closed down every airport in America.
And that's something interesting. We were talking about alert of coming in here. Radar at National Airport had to show that jet coming in. How much warning did they know that they had somebody unauthorized in the airspace? It's constantly monitored, of course, because of potential threats for the White House. So how much advance warning did they know? And obviously they didn't know the intention, not that they could have stopped it.
And right now the enemies are simply they, because we don't know who they are.
Very much so.
Greyhound shut down bus service in the Northeast. Amtrak suspend train service in the Northeast Corridor. American section of St. Lawrence Seaway closed. Manhattan subway line shut down. Louisiana offshore oil port handling supertankers in the Gulf of Mexico suspended. Security of a Great Lakes shipping titan. Coast Guard inspecting ships in St. Mary's River, linking Lake Huron to Lake Superior, and on and on and on and on. And that's a first.
It is.
And the fire continues to burn out of control here at the Pentagon.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Dave Statter.
There are, as Dave said, they believe there are many people still trapped inside. They don't know how many, and probably fatalities. But a lot of the injured from the Pentagon were taken over to Virginia Hospital Center.
Well, that's right. And Jennifer Ryan now is there with more. Jennifer?
Good evening to both of you. We are here at the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, where so many of the people from the Pentagon were brought, because this is the closest location. It's about 5 miles away from the Pentagon, and all day we've been seeing people come in here, different modes of transportation, many ambulances, police cars, unmarked cars. People just packed victims into their van, and they brought them here because these were people who needed help. They battled the traffic. They eventually got them here. 30 people in all, we're told, 13 admitted to the hospital today. Of them, there are 8 people in intensive care, 4 of them on ventilators, very serious injuries. We spoke with the Assistant Director of Emergency Services, Dr. John Sverher, not too long ago. Here's what he had to say.
We've seen a variety of injuries. I guess a lot of those we've seen are typically associated with a blast-type injuries. We've seen a lot of smoke inhalation injuries, and those people have been some of the sickest folks here. We've also seen some fractures of the extremities, also burns to the face and hands. Those have been the primary injuries we've seen. None of our physicians are currently going out to the field. I should say that many of our physicians have offered to go out to the field, but the response we're getting from them right now is that it's not necessary.
They are caring for the 30 people who are here today, and we've already heard of a few discharges. Some people have been allowed to go back home, find their way home after all of this. We have some incredible video that we've been shooting all day of people arriving with various injuries. So many of the injuries, cuts and bruises and broken bones and that sort of thing. We were told that of the burn injuries, there are a few that are very serious, and there's thought that they might send them to other burn units in the area. Of course, there's a big problem with traffic, getting them there in a timely manner and whatnot, so they haven't made any permanent permanent plans yet, but they are trying to come up with some strategic plan in case those people do need to be moved into higher level trauma centers. They are in need of blood in this city as well as New York. It is a huge cry for blood tonight because they're going to run short. This time of year is always difficult, so if you can and you want to help, you should donate blood. We've also seen lots of deliveries, IVs, tubes, oxygen tanks, and as soon as they arrive here, you see ambulance crews pull up, load their vehicles up with whatever they can get, gauze, bandages, and then go back out to the field again. One quick note, something new. As I hear yet another siren in the background, we were just told that there would be no more arrivals here from the Pentagon. Not because they can't accept them. They said they do have space, but we were told that they don't have anybody letting them know that somebody is arriving. But I say that, of course, as everybody turns over to the other side here, waiting for another emergency vehicle to pull up. Of course, we don't know. This is how it's been all day. People arrive via ambulance. Here indeed is an ambulance. I'll step out of the way. Again, this is an ambulance that pulls in here. We don't know if this is a victim of the Pentagon. It could be. It could also be a supplies delivery, but we're not sure. But this, you'll see in the front of this hospital, it was packed earlier today. It was packed earlier today, and there were emergency workers everywhere. The front entrance of this hospital only has a few police officers, so this may be just a routine transport of a patient.
Is anybody going through the video?
Excuse me, Gordon?
No, Jennifer, that's okay. We're trying to actually talk to our assignment desk as we're listening to you, just to get the latest on some of the video that we've shot. You stay there for us. I know you'll be there all afternoon to bring us up to date on the condition of the patients there.
You bet. And
all
again,
right?
30 people, Gervier.
Right. Thank you, Jennifer Ryan at Virginia Hospital Center. We appreciate it. We want to go to Admiral Craig Quigley at the Pentagon to bring us up to date on what's going on there.
That's as high as it goes. Normally, that is imposed on a local basis. But given the magnitude of the attacks today, it was directed worldwide. Those two things.
Bragging about the F-16, the shoot-down.
There was a rumor earlier today, several hours ago now, that some F-16s or one F-16 had shot down some plane somewhere. That didn't happen. I cannot explain to you the cause of the crash of the airplane near Pittsburgh, but it was not engagement by a U.S. fighter aircraft.
What happened? What about fighter aircraft?
I don't have an estimate on
What
that.
about the two carriers?
So there was a rumor hours ago that there was a fighter that had shot down an aircraft. It's not.
So the U.S. Air Force was not shot down. Do you know anything about the plane? All right. Yeah. Okay. So I think we ought to go. Yeah. All right. So are you saying it's not?
Admiral Craig Quigley with the Pentagon explaining to those folks. There are a lot of rumors, as you would imagine, floating around out there. We actually watched some of the fighter planes circling the Pentagon earlier, and they were asking him whether one of those planes had reportedly shot down a plane in the area, and he said no.
Well, and the reason they were up there is because there was a report that there was another airliner up there, and they thought that might be heading to the Pentagon, and they moved us back, and they moved other people back. So
but there were 4 planes. Just to bring you up to date for those of you that are just joining us, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to L.A., 92 passengers on board hit the World Trade Center this morning. United Airlines Flight 175, it was a 767 from Boston to L.A., 65 people on board. That hit the World Trade Center. The one that hit the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77 from Dulles to L.A. And Gordon, this one, we know at least one of the people that was on board that plane.
We understand that Barbara Olson, the wife of the Solicitor General and a Washington personality in her own right because of her own achievements, was on board that airplane because apparently she used her cell phone from that aircraft. So. And
also a cell phone call apparently made from the United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco. That's the plane that went down right outside Pittsburgh. There are reports from an emergency personnel worker who says he got a frantic call from a man who said that he was trapped inside of the lavatory in that plane.
Here's a special late edition of the Washington Post. As you can see, terror hits Pentagon, World Trade Center. It's been a while since you've seen a special late edition of the Washington Post, which, as you know, is a morning newspaper.
The last time, I think, Gordon, wasn't it the election, right after the election? I think that's what we're told.
My memory's failing me at this stage of the
I
game.
believe so.
Let's go
I
back to the
believe so.
Pentagon and Dave Statter. Dave, did Quigley have anything else to say?
Yeah, there's some very important information at the top of what he had to say, and Heather Cabot was right there. Heather, what did Admiral Quigley say?
Basically, he wanted to clarify a couple of questions that reporters had asked before. Number one, that all service secretaries are accounted for. Number two, that all military installations around the world are in Delta threat condition. And also he wanted to clarify that there had been some speculation that an F-16 had shot down a plane near Pennsylvania. He said that did not happen, was not a result of engagement, and just wanted to make sure that he clarified that for reporters and obviously for the public who are listening to this broadcast.
If you remember the briefing before this, they could not confirm that all the heads of the various military were accounted for. Now they can confirm that. That's Rear Admiral Craig Quigley, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. So at least that is some good news coming out of here. But there are a lot of other people, I am sure, right now here at this building who are unaccounted for, and it may take some time before we know who they are and specific numbers, and that's what they're unable to give us at the moment.
All right, Dave,
Thank you,
as I said, Dave Statter, thanks very much to the Pentagon. As I said earlier, for the first time in history, to my knowledge, the Federal Aviation has shut down every airport in the United States, and Gary Reels is at one of them right now, national. Gary?
Okay, Gordon and Gervais, the roadblock right here behind us, that's as close as the public gets to National Airport, and that's going to remain the case until at least noon tomorrow. That word from the Federal Aviation Administration just in the past half hour. With us now, Jonathan Gaffney of the Washington Metropolitan Airport Authority. Jonathan, does that mean that National is going to reopen at noon tomorrow?
Too soon to tell. That you heard kind of what we heard, which is at noon tomorrow the system will start up again. Obviously, we'll try to accommodate the nation's travels as soon as we possibly can. Obviously we need to know more details, make sure the building is safe, and we'll get started like everybody else as soon as we possibly can.
But the point is, 12 o'clock tomorrow is the earliest. It could well be later than that.
Exactly. If you without knowing the details, I think they said is no earlier than noontime tomorrow. Obviously, we'll get ready to start as soon as it's appropriate after that.
One of the many, oh so many amazing sights today were military helicopters hovering over the landing area here at Reagan National. Can you, obviously it was a security precaution.
Sure. Again, it appeared, for all intents and purposes, that the airspace, certainly the airports were closed. The airspace was completely closed down, and the only traffic you saw in the sky were military aircraft, including military fighter aircraft, something we've never seen before, obviously, and hope to never see again.
Now, of course, Dulles is under your purview as
Correct.
well, and that receives many international flights. Flights around the world are flying today, but obviously those bound for the U.S. are not coming to the U.S.
Exactly. That's a good point, because what happened today for the first time that anybody can remember is the nation's aviation system was shut down. We know it is blizzards and weather for a couple of days. This is the whole nation all at the same time. We have a large number of flights, obviously inbound to Dulles, our European flights coming in. I couldn't even tell you where they'll all end up. And so the watchword for everybody for tonight and for the next few days is great patience to kind of see how this whole thing starts sorted out, how it gets started again, and people will kind of get to where they need to be. It's just going to take a while.
But most of those flights will be diverted to airports in Canada?
I understand this morning, again, there's so much rumor and innuendo. I heard this morning from the news, as a matter of fact, that all those European flights all to the United States were all going to Canada. Now, whether that's going to be true or not, I don't know.
Jonathan, one of the many questions without an answer right now, that flight that was hijacked out of Pittsburgh, the speculation, the theory is that it was heading toward Washington or Camp David. Do you know anything about that?
Not at all, Gary. Again, those are just one of those. As you know, all the thousands of rumors that happened today, obviously there'll be the investigations of all investigations to sort out all these things that have happened. Can't comment on that. Don't know anything about it.
That is significantly the one hijacked aircraft that did not make it to an apparent target taken down in an open field up there.
Sure, it would appear that way. This morning after, frankly, shortly, once that happened up in New York, we obviously, everyone in aviation identified that, there's a problem here. When you had a plane crash, half a mile into the Pentagon, that's when we decided immediately to evacuate the entire airport, which we did almost immediately. Everybody came off the airplanes, everyone got off the airport, as you've seen. Same thing with Dulles, because frankly, we just did not know what the next step would be.
Lastly, we understand as well, I believe Karen Hughes over at at the White House announced that not only are the airports closed, but indeed at the moment they made the decision, those flights that were already in air were told to land at the nearest airport all across the country.
You know, Gary, I had heard that, and I think we actually might have gotten a couple at Dulles, but again, not know for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Jonathan Gaffney. Gordon and Gavir, again, the situation here at National Airport, it is closed up, as are all of the airports of the United States until noon tomorrow at the earliest.
Gary, that flight you were talking about or asking about was United Flight 93. It originated in Newark. It was headed to San Francisco. It crashed right outside Pittsburgh, and it was Representative Jim Moran who said that its intended target was Camp David.
Of course, you have to ask yourself, how does this happen? How do 4 airliners get hijacked when we supposedly have security at all the major airports, involved?
A software engineer who works near the World Trade Center, quote from him, he said, "How devastating, how frustrating. What can you do?"
Well, Peggy Fox is now live at Dulles International Airport, which of course is also shut down, and where one of the hijacked planes reportedly left from there this morning. Peggy, what are you hearing out there?
Well, I'll tell you, this morning I got here around 10 o'clock and people were very scared, you know, as the news was kind of trickling in. Right now it is closed. Very eerily quiet. Tell you what, this morning again chaotic as employees and passengers scrambled to get out. Hundreds of stranded travelers at Dulles Airport look stunned as they absorbed the news this morning. What's your first reaction about being in America?
It's awful, of course. And what was really for us incredible that everything is closed.
When flights were stopped, planes were abandoned, left right at the gates. Inside, the American Airlines counter was evacuated. We're told one of the workers at this counter had been on that hijacked flight. Outside, flags were lowered to half staff around the airport. Security was stepped up with concrete barriers. Inside, phone lines were jammed as people tried to figure out how to get home.
My flight was supposed to land at 10, and I got in a little after because we were diverted from National here to Dulles. And it is now, 1:45, and there's no transportation out of here, and they don't want us here in the building, so we're not quite sure what's going to happen.
There were quite a few travelers here this morning who had been diverted from National because National closed first, so the airlines came here, and lots of people who weren't sure where to go, how to get home. That woman had come for a one-day conference, and she lives in Michigan. I hope she found a room because I'm told all the hotels in the area are filled. Now, for anybody who thinks they might have friends or relatives or loved ones on any of those hijacked flights, I do have some phone numbers for you, and I hope we can put the numbers up for you. Airlines, American Airlines, the number for friends and relatives, 703-661-5211, 703-661-5211. And for United Airlines, it's a 1-800 number, 1-800-932-8555, 1-800-932-8555. And as Gary Reels reported, this airport and the others shut down at least until noon tomorrow. They have put these several concrete barriers in, and it looks like they're here to stay for a while. For now, I'm Peggy Fox, live at Dulles Airport. Gordon and Gavir.
Peggy, thanks very much. Going back to New York, Mayor Rudy Giuliani says 2,100 people were injured that they know of now, 1,500 walking wounded, 600 others taken to area hospitals, 150 of them, this is New York, in critical condition. But in terms of the people who lost lives, I have a sense, he says, it's a horrendous number of lives lost. Right now we have to focus on saving as many lives as possible. Peggy?
A lot of people had compared this to Pearl Harbor. Of course, 2,400 people lost their lives at Pearl Harbor.
But Senator John McCain, Senator Hagel referred to it as that, but Senator John McCain says this is an act of war. The question is, against whom and with whom?
President Bush, of course, is vowing to hunt down the people responsible and hold them responsible. And he's actually getting a little bit of support from former President Clinton, who led us through the Oklahoma City bombing back in 1995, said now is a time for the country to rally behind the President of the United States.
President Bush spoke shortly after the Trade Center bombing. President Bush spoke to the press about the attacks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Pace and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
Now, President Bush was in Florida when the attacks happened, and instead of coming back to Washington, as he said he was going to do, of course, the Secret Service takes over and the military takes over. He went to a military base in Louisiana. From there, he made a stronger statement against the bombing.
I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Now, shortly after he made that statement, President Bush boarded Air Force One again and took off. Air Force One landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. We heard from Ann Contman of ABC News, who was the TV pool reporter. The president is reported to be at a secure location, of course. Other high-ranking government officials have been taken to secure locations. They had a meeting of the National Security Council by telephone or radio or however they do it while the president was up there in Nebraska.
Gordon, the president's vowing to find whoever's responsible for these attacks, but at this point we don't know who that is. Gene Poteet is the president of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, and he says no pilot, even with a gun to his head, is going to fly into the world towers. He says this means that the terrorists flew the planes themselves.
D.C. Mayor Tony Williams also reacted to the news of the terrorist attacks. Here's what he had to say about the state of emergency declared in the district.
The state of emergency has been declared to ensure that in the event we have an incident, in the event the worst were to happen, we are completely prepared and ready to act. Right now, I would characterize our actions, and certainly this press conference is part of that, is simply putting all of our citizens in our city on the highest state of alert.
Now, there's a shortage of blood.
Yeah, the Red Cross has an urgent need for blood donations. They need all types, especially type O, that's the universal donor. If you can help, you can get in touch with one of the Red Cross donation centers. Those centers are going to stay open for extended hours tonight. And I'm also told that we're sending help to the New York area with blood supplies as well.
So now, where do you go to donate the blood? Well, I understand Andrews Air Force Base and Washington Hospital Center. Of course, you know, there are traffic problems getting to those places, Boeing Air Force Base. But here's some Red Cross phone numbers if you want more specific details. 1-866-BLOOD-SAVES, 1-866-256-6372 if you want to donate blood. And they're going to need a lot of it, especially in New York, as Gravier says.
Verge, Jacques and I were both down by the Capitol earlier today, just around 3rd and Pennsylvania. And Verge, I believe, is that where you still are, Verge?
Gravier, I've moved. I'm on K Street. Over my shoulder is going east towards 14th Street. Normally, you expect to find a lot more traffic out here late afternoon, rush hour in downtown D.C., but not today because of the terrorist incidents. Scary. That's how some people describe the situation this morning. Many people said they've lived here a long, long time, but they've never seen anything like this before. Fighter planes in the air. Gridlock on the streets. Police are everywhere. A man stops to pray. These are the sights and sounds of downtown Washington under siege.
Mom, I'm on my way home. Now we have to walk home.
Workers head home as all federal offices are closed.
I think it's awful because it appears that we're not prepared for this type of thing at all. I'm an employee at one of these federal buildings.
Something I guess we've feared since the Oklahoma City bombing, and now that, I mean, this is real and it's so tiered and it's so well orchestrated, and, you know, I was angry.
The U.S. Capitol is evacuated. House and Senate leaders are taken away by helicopter to a secure location. Everyone seems to be asking, how could this happen in the world's most powerful city?
Incredible. I mean, how could this happen and who's responsible?
Well, you never know what's going to happen, so I don't think there's any way to stop it.
I think it's a sad day in America. We were standing over by the White House waiting to get in for a briefing, and all the people came out, and it was very, very sad to see that.
Concerned residents and tourists stopped to listen to the radio and watch TV as the drama unfolds.
The Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Fire Department is on its highest state of alert.
It's crazy. I've never seen a city like this before.
Within a few hours, many streets are empty as much of Washington has come to a standstill. And much of Washington is still at a standstill as many streets are closed and traffic is being diverted away from federal buildings and landmarks. Gordon and Gavir?
Verge, Jacques in downtown Washington, thanks a lot.
Well, here's the Washington Times extra. One-word headline, horror. Washington Post, terror. This is a special late edition. Terror hits the Pentagon, World Trade Center.
And if you're just joining us, the reason is this. This is because of 3 terrorist attacks today on targets in the United States. One of those attacks demolished part of the Pentagon. The other 2 hijacked planes intentionally crashed into 2 towers of the World Trade Center building in New York, bringing them to rubble. Those 2 towers standing 110 stories high. A 4th attack, a plane went down outside of the Pittsburgh area. Many believe the intended target was Camp David.
The terrorists chose their targets carefully. The Pentagon, of course, the world's largest office building in a sense. More than 50,000, 24,000 people work in the Pentagon, 50,000 people work in the World Trade Towers. Gretchen Carlson has a look at the damage from New York.
Both 110-story towers of New York's World Trade Center collapsed after unknown terrorists attacked the buildings this morning. 2 aircraft, about 18 minutes apart, flew directly into the towers just as workers were arriving around 9 a.m. The second attack was captured on videotape, showing a large plane smashing into one of the 110-story skyscrapers. The building burst into flames, dropping debris all over the narrow streets of Lower Manhattan. Many are dead. Thousands are believed to be critically wounded. 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center.
I looked up and I saw the second plane hit. Had to be a commercial-sized airliner.
What went through your mind?
That it couldn't be real.
A short time later, when top portions of one of the towers collapsed, people on the ground were sent running for their lives.
Let's get out of here.
Officials stopped all flights across the nation. Both planes are believed to have been hijacked. All bridges and tunnels in New York have been closed, while security forces across the nation have been put on the highest alert.
CBS News quotes FBI sources as saying a total of 4 planes were hijacked, then intentionally crashed this morning. The latest one just 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. Gretchen Carlson, CBS News, New York.
American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was one of the planes that crashed into one of the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. Here's the brother of the pilot of that plane.
It's been reported that my brother John was the captain of American Airlines Flight 11, which was hijacked out of Logan Airport this morning en route to Los Angeles, California. John leaves behind a loving family, his wife, 3 lovely daughters, his parents, brothers and sisters, numerous aunts and uncles, friends, loving community. Our family is obviously grieving, as is the whole nation, for what has happened today. I personally think I'm in shock. I'm in some type of denial. I keep looking at the cornfield behind me, hoping that my brother comes walking on out.
That's Jim Ogonowski, the brother of American Airlines pilot John Ogonowski, who we believe was killed when the American Airlines jetliner crashed into the World Trade Towers this morning. Also, we understand the president's on his way back to Washington.
We're being told that.
Now, the attack on the Twin Towers in New York has sparked high security alerts at big buildings all over the country. Evacuations ordered to the United Nations building in New York, the Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest buildings in Boston, that would be the Prudential and the John Hancock. Also, buildings in Cleveland and Minneapolis were closed. Seattle's landmark Space Needle was closed today. Of course, here in Washington, they've closed down the monuments and memorials. The financial markets were closed. They're also heightening security at the big dams all over the country.
Right, they are. And also, Gordon, for the first time since D-Day in 1944, they've canceled all baseball games.
That's right,
today.
Major League Baseball.
For the first time since 44.
Right.
Again, the markets have been closed, all U.S. financial markets, because of the situation that happened in New York and also here. Trading's going to resume as soon as practical, we're told. Many of the nation's investment firms, or at least some of their operations at the World Trade Center or surrounding buildings, have been shut down, and what happened there could limit their ability to restart trading quickly.
And the terrorist attacks put a halt to the primary election in New York City. You know, it was a hard-fought election. Voters were going to select candidates for the mayor's office and other city offices. The judge in charge of the Board of Elections called off the election because, of course of all the confusion and terror that followed the attack on the Twin Towers in New York. We don't know when that election will take place now. British Prime Minister Tony Blair, one of the world's first leaders to condemn today's attacks. Remarks marked for sympathy for the victims and anger at the attackers. Here's what Tony Blair said.
There have been the most terrible, shocking events taking place in the United States of America within the last hour or so, including two hijacked planes being flown deliberately into the World Trade Center. I'm afraid we can only imagine the terror and the carnage there, and the many, many innocent people that will have lost their lives. I know that you would want to join with me in sending the deepest condolences to President Bush and to the American people on behalf of the British people at these terrible events. This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair. A totally different story in Israel's West Bank today. Thousands of Palestinians celebrated the terrorist attacks in the United States, chanting, "God is great," and distributing candy to passers-by in the West Bank town of Nablus. About 3,000 people poured into the street just after the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and government targets in Washington. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, however, disagreed.
We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Senator Reis, are you planning to call the U.S. president to convey the personal condolences?
I will send him directly a quick telegram.
Arafat called the attacks terrible. We have another look now at the damage at the Pentagon. A plane crashed into the building this morning about an hour after two hijacked airliners crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York. Those twin crashes touched off the worst day of terror against America, starting before 9 o'clock this morning.
Earlier today, I spoke
At approximately 8:45 Eastern Standard Time, a plane crashes into one of the towers at the World Trade Center in New York. Some 18 minutes later, television viewers across the country watch in astonishment as a jetliner flies right into the second Trade Center tower. In Sarasota, Florida, President Bush calls the crashes an apparent terrorist attack and a national tragedy.
And have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
About an hour after the attacks on the World Trade Center, a plane crashes into the Pentagon in Northern Virginia.
It had no landing gear down, and it was coming very, very rapidly, and then it took a dive, and I saw it coming, and I hollered, "Hit the deck," and everybody in the office hit the deck because they knew that the World Trade Center was on fire.
9:30 a.m. Government buildings from the White House to the Capitol are evacuated as officials cite credible threats of terrorist attacks. The Federal Aviation Administration shuts down aircraft takeoffs across the country. Just before 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, one of the World Trade Center towers collapses. 30 minutes later, the second tower also crumbles. Then a fourth explosion rocks the debris. At 10:35 a.m., victims of the attack on the Pentagon arrive at Virginia Hospital Center. 26 people are confirmed injured, but no fatalities reported. At 11:30 a.m., American Airlines confirms that 2 of its flights were hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles with 92 passengers aboard, and American Flight 77 from Washington to Los Angeles with 64 people aboard. United Airlines also confirms that United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco crashed 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The plane carried 45 passengers. The airline also reports that United Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles with 65 people on board crashed but would not say where.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Now, earlier today, I spoke to Harry Goad. Harry Goad is with the Space Policy and Acquisitions Division of the Defense Department, and he works on the 5th floor of the Pentagon in that circle inside the Pentagon. He actually watched the aircraft as it approached the building, headed right for him. Here's what Harry Goad told me.
We were just watching the World Trade Center on the internet, and I turned around, and I'm at a very large window, and I turned around and looked, and I saw the silver 757, it looked like to me, veering from the registered course over the Potomac River, and it had no landing gear down, and it was coming very, very rapidly, and then it took a dive, maybe a couple of miles, maybe over Roslyn. It took a dive into this building, and I saw it coming, and I hollered, hit the deck, and everybody in the office hit the deck because they knew that the World Trade Center was on fire.
So you figured this was it?
This was it. They were coming in, and, you know, they're going to hit a lot of buildings, and this is going to be one of them.
So there's no question in your mind that the pilot, whoever was piloting that aircraft, was aiming for the building?
He was aiming for the building, but he could have went into center court mighty easily, which would have really done some damage, and I don't know. But whoever hit the outside, God bless him, because that's that also is an area of the Pentagon that's going to be under renovation. We've already done one wedge, and we've moved a lot of people out of this wedge here over there.
Well, that's Harry Goad, who works for the Space Acquisitions and Space Policy Acquisitions Division of the Department of Defense.
Security, of course, is at an all-time high in our area. Bruce LaChanze at 17th and K with more on what's going on down there. Lots of police officers and a show of support there, Bruce.
Absolutely, Gravir. We are atop the U.S. Chamber of Commerce building on Lafayette Square. They have just lowered the flag to half staff here above the building. They've yet to move the flags on top of the old executive office building back behind there. You can see the smoke from the fire at the Pentagon just back behind me. And imagine the flying time from there at the Pentagon over here to the White House. It is just a few minutes. And indeed, this morning, during the course of the hit at the Pentagon, and all the confusion and so forth, there was a serious concern about an unidentified, low-flying aircraft that was approaching the White House. Take a look at some of the videotape that we collected earlier today. People in a panic evacuating the White House and the entire downtown area. Some of the reporters, the photographers who were in the press room at the White House, who had stayed behind as the president went out on his trip to Florida, said that they came out on the PA, reported this low-flying, unidentified aircraft, demanded that everybody leave. Everybody was ordered out of the White House. Senior staff were taken to another location. As the White House went, so went much of downtown. The Starbucks closed, the delis closed, all the office buildings closed, and everybody who had just arrived for work was ordered out of town. That created a scene of intense gridlock down here. A lot of people afraid to get on the metro, and so they tried to wend their way, some of them in the back of pickup trucks, loaded into the back of pickup trucks, trying to get out of town, and it took them a very, very long time. We watched one person moved in an hour, only 1 block. Now, we have some other news as well. One of the big security concerns here up until this event, of course, has been the IMF World Bank protests scheduled for the end of the month. They were planning to ring the White House with protesters. Well, I have just gotten off the phone a short time ago with Lisa Fithian, who is with the Mobilization for Global Justice. And we could take a look at some of the videotape of the previous demonstrations last April as I talked to you about what she said. She tells me that they have scheduled an emergency meeting of the protest organizers for tomorrow to try and reevaluate what they should do in light of these apparent terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. She expects that there will be a number of conference calls over the course of the evening as people try and sort this out and decide what to do. She says it certainly will have an impact on them, and that there is some possibility that they would cancel. They're hoping perhaps that the IMF and the World Bank move and cancel their meetings, but we have been unable so far to get a hold of anybody at the World Bank or the IMF. So again, the protest organizers reevaluating in light of this action what they're going to do on those scheduled protests at the end of the month. No decision clearly made so far. They insist that people need to think about the killing that goes on overseas and whether that has an impact on what's happened today in the United States. But they say they will be discussing this and that there is some possibility that those protests may be called off. Gordon Gravier, back to you with broadcast.
Bruce, a couple of things have already been canceled. I know the Emmys have been postponed. And as I just told Gordon a couple of minutes ago, National Baseball has canceled all games for today. First time since 1944 D-Day. So we'll just have to watch and see what happens with IMF World Bank.
You know, Bruce, from where you're standing, Washington looks so beautiful.
Absolutely.
This evening.
I mean, it's a beautiful sunny day, and you look out, and on the wide shot, as Tad takes a picture, wide shot down to the Jefferson and the Washington Monument and the White House, it looks like a normal day until, Tad, you zoom into the roof of the White House and you see that there is a heavily mobilized force. There usually are snipers up there, but there are far more of them than normal. And we're waiting now to see if they lower the flag atop the White House to half staff.
All right, if you didn't know, you would think it was just another beautiful late summer evening here in Washington, D.C.
It was very surreal there, Gordon.
Yeah.
Well, most of the congressional leadership's been taken to a secure location, but Republican Senator John McCain did make a statement. He says that these attacks are an act of war.
The situation is so serious that words don't describe it. I think that it's clear that the organization and magnitude of the attacks required more than a few people to perpetrate it, and it'll take some time to determine who they are and who supported these attacks, but I think we'll find them out, and they will suffer the full measure of our justice. This is obviously an act of war that's been committed on the United States of America.
John McCain survived many years in a North Vietnamese prisoner of war camp, as you know, and now he's a United States Senator from Arizona and a former presidential candidate. National Guard's been called in Virginia and the district, and a state of emergency has been declared, also in Maryland. Joining us now for more on what that means is Professor Steve Wormail from American University School of Law. What does that mean, Professor?
Well, I think this was an effort by the local governments to get some control over the situation, make sure they could keep the streets clear, make sure that emergency medical vehicles can get through. I don't think they're intending this to be a kind of law enforcement mobilization. We're not under martial law. It's just a state of emergency.
Professor, now the National Guard's been called up, and of course they've been called up in situations of emergency in our country in the past. What sort of powers do they have?
The National Guard, is often used in severe emergencies, in hurricane situations, and to try to keep the streets clear, to work with emergency medical vehicles. They can be used to engage in law enforcement and to break up crowds and so on. Again, I think that's probably not the intent here. I think they're trying to provide support to make sure that the local areas keep functioning.
Well, we've been worried about these kind of attacks for a long time, Professor, as you know, and of course we didn't know what form they were going to take, and you have to assume that others may be planned. At what point do you start to worry about your civil liberties as government clamps down?
Well, I think that's an immediate worry, and it's something that I think we have to keep an eye on. Obviously, both local and national law enforcement have a strong interest in trying to figure out who's responsible and trying to make sure that there aren't more of these attacks. And I think they're going to be under pressure to do it quickly and thoroughly and to reassure the American people. I hope that in the process they'll be reassuring the American people that they're doing it according to the Constitution.
Well, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. At what point do citizens begin to say, wait a minute, we're approaching the area of unreasonable search and seizure here?
Well, I think you may have that even without suspending habeas corpus. I think there aren't too many judges right now in the country that would turn down a request for a wiretap or a search warrant from the FBI that said they, suspected somebody in connection with these events. I hope we're not going to have that kind of panic.
And certainly we can't, as citizens, continue to live our lives in fear, although caution's always good.
Caution's good, and I hope it doesn't become a fear situation. I hope we don't have people starting to act rashly, and I hope we don't start engaging in stereotyping and all kinds of evils that could follow from all of that.
Well, it is a danger when you consider that there are an awful lot of people in this country who do not have the best interests of the country in mind, who some of them may be here illegally. I'm not talking about immigrant workers or things of that nature, but I'm talking about, our borders have been fairly porous over the years.
Well, and they've taken emergency steps today to close the borders. They certainly can beef up security at the borders. I would guess that people who are traveling in the immediate future, especially foreign nationals, are going to find travel more difficult. They may find themselves detained at airports for longer periods of time. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of that going on. Some of it may be justified, and again, I would just hope that we do our best to kind of keep it within the confines of people's constitutional rights.
Well, and those of us who travel by air a lot are going to find ourselves inconvenienced, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Professor Steve Wormeal, thank you very much from American University School of Law. I believe, I'm told that we're now looking at a live picture. Air Force One leaving Omaha, Nebraska, headed back to Washington, D.C. That word coming just a short while ago that the president was indeed headed back here. He had been in Sarasota, Florida earlier today when he got word of the attacks at the World Trade Center and then the Pentagon. And then he was taken to Shreveport, Louisiana, at the Air Force Base there, where he made his remarks about the attacks.
Then he went to Nebraska.
Then to Nebraska and now to here.
Now, the First Lady, Laura Bush, was supposed to testify this morning before a Senate Committee on Education chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. But because of the attacks, the hearing was postponed. Mrs. Bush and Senator Kennedy spoke to reporters.
All of us reach out as Americans to the brave rescue workers that are attempting to help our fellow citizens. We, out of respect for those efforts, have postponed our hearing this morning. We underline the point that it is postponed. We are not going to see the business of America deferred because of terrorism.
You heard from the President this morning, and Senator Kennedy and Senator Gregg and I both join his statement in saying that our hearts and our prayers go out to the victims of this act of terrorism, and that our support goes to the rescue workers, and all of our prayers are with everyone there right now. Thank you all.
Is there a message you could tell to the nation's...
Well, parents need to reassure their children everywhere in our country that they're safe.
That was Mrs. Bush. That was Senator Judd Gregg of New Hampshire to Mrs. Bush's right. After that news conference, Mrs. Bush, Senator Kennedy, Senator Gregg, and the rest of the congressional leadership went to undisclosed secure locations.
One of the things that we're dealing with right now is the need for blood, especially because of the situation in New York. They're expecting thousands of casualties there. On the phone with us right now is Kelly Alexander with the Red Cross. Ms. Alexander, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Can you bring us up to date on the situation for us locally, first of all, in terms of the need for blood?
Well, right now, for the American Red Cross, from our standpoint, we are well prepared to supply the blood that is needed in the area. We actually have 50,000 units of blood that we are working with state and local officials to get out to D.C. and to New York. So right now, we are not making an emergency appeal for blood. We feel that we're well prepared. If people have appointments scheduled to donate blood in the next day or the next few weeks, we encourage them to keep those appointments because we anticipate that we may be called on, for that amount of time or maybe even longer to help with situations for the victim.
Is that 50,000, you think, going to be enough? At this point, you're really not sure about the number of casualties or even the need for blood, rather, in the New York area.
Right. At this point, we're not totally sure. We expect there, is going to be a need. We have officials that have been in contact with emergency services there, so we are prepared to help out in any way we can. But again, at this point, we don't see a need for an emergency appeal.
All right. Kelly Alexander with the American Red Cross, we thank you.
Thank you.
We have a look at, let's go back to the Pentagon now, and Dave Statter, where, of course, it's still smoking over there, I guess, Dave.
Yeah, the new information, let me show you what's going on here now. As you see this line of vehicles going down toward the Pentagon, they're from Montgomery County. The Urban Search and Rescue Team from Montgomery County just arrived under a police escort of Montgomery County police officers. These are Montgomery County Fire and Rescue workers on the ride-on bus, plus their heavy equipment. In front of them, and I'm not sure if you can quite see them now, are some large rigging devices, large construction equipment that has arrived here now to go through that rubble. And again, sadly, most firefighters predict that this will be a recovery rather than a rescue operation, but certainly they're going to try to hold out hope. They have to get in there at some point when the fire is put under control. They're still fighting fire here. There's still smoke coming out of the roof of this building at either end of where the crash site occurred. Now, I understand we're going to go to some amateur video shot earlier today, probably about the same time we arrived at the Pentagon, if somebody can show us that. I don't believe that's it. Well, that may be it. These are some of the people who were injured. Okay, this is the amateur video, which pretty much what we showed you earlier today of some of the burned people who were here as soon as we arrived, people who were seriously burned. And this was the fire at 9:45 this morning when the plane crashed into the Pentagon on the heliport side. Rescue operations began immediately. We've heard of one Army captain who just went in there to help his colleagues, pulled out some injured and burned people, and himself had his hands burned, was sent to the hospital reluctantly, and supposedly is back here helping out. But the news right now is that the Urban Search and Rescue Team from Montgomery County has now joined their colleagues from Fairfax County on the scene. They're getting closer to the Pentagon. The fire, we haven't seen flames in a while, but still a great deal of smoke coming off the roof of the building. That area to the right of the big gaping hole there is the newer portion of the Pentagon. We are told that those offices are sparsely populated. They're just moving back into those offices, and they do have up-to-date fire equipment. Most of the fire burned toward the left side of the hole, continued to travel up a great distance there to where you should see shortly some smoke that's still coming out of, there. That's how far away the fire traveled. We've talked to firefighters who've fought fires in the Pentagon before, and they describe it as a maze, a very difficult situation trying to travel these corridors when they're filled with smoke. That's difficult for trained firefighters. Imagine what it was like for the people working in the Pentagon this morning.
Dave, you can get lost in that building when there's no fire. It's a very confusing building unless you know it.
Absolutely. And those firefighters who fought fires, I'm told there was one back in 1959. I believe there was one in the 60s or 70s that went on for hours and hours. And the big problem firefighters had is they got lost in there, didn't know where they were. I think there's better communications now and they have a better idea, but still they're having a tough problem because the fire just spread so quickly. And the big news here is we still cannot tell you how many people are unaccounted for, how many people may be in there dead.
And when everybody's there, what, about 24,000 people?
24,000, I understand, a number of employees. This happened at 9:38 this morning, right, Dave?
9:38 is one time. I've heard 9:45. The collapse occurred. We looked at our time code on when Mike Trammell was taping it. 10:17 is when it collapsed, about 30 minutes later.
Now, Dave, the name Osama bin Laden keeps coming up in terms of these terrorist attacks. But earlier today, the spiritual leader of the Taliban in Afghanistan, Mullah Omar, said that Osama bin Laden could not have been responsible for this because it was so complex. But in any case, U.S. officials, a couple of them now, are now saying that they do suspect Osama bin Laden, which is the name that always comes up in these things.
Right, and tomorrow was the day that a judge in New York had scheduled sentencing for an accomplice of Osama bin Laden's for attacks at the World Trade Center, or rather Tanzania, the bombings in Tanzania. In 1998. That sentencing was scheduled for tomorrow in New York at a courtroom very close to the World Trade Center.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Well, it's been a very frightening day for people all across the country. New York City erupted into chaos before 9 o'clock this morning as thousands of people ran for safety from terrorism attacks at the World Trade Center. 2 planes were intentionally flown into the upper floors of the World Trade Center towers, causing both of them to explode into flames and collapse. And as those towers burned and began to crumble, people inside the World Trade Center were hanging out of the windows, some of them trying to jump to safety. There are no confirmed figures yet on the number of injured, dead, or survivors, but estimates from New York say there may be thousands of people dead.
Here in Washington, a 3rd plane intentionally flown into the Pentagon. A 4th aircraft also crashed outside of Pittsburgh, also hijacked. You're watching continuing coverage of the terrorist attacks.
Stay with us. Our live team coverage of this day continues right now on 9 Eyewitness News at 5.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
This is being seen on Capitol Hill as another Pearl Harbor.
Devastating. I've never covered anything like this in my life. That building literally became a bomb itself. No one had a chance to